Basically, EPA, via FIFRA, or Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, or Pesticide Act, funds pesticide program for most of the states, pretty much all the states in the union. We're paid to basically enforce the federal law and then enforce state laws as well. So what does that mean? What does that entail? Well, the label is the law according to state and federal law. So one of the things that we're doing is looking to see if applicators are making applications according to the label. Because those directions aren't just general directions, they're also the law that have to apply according to that. If there is a complaint against an applicator, we'll investigate. We normally do spot inspections, random inspections with various applicators, just to be sure that we're doing it according to law and label. What isn't covered under the label is basically the other laws cover things such as drift. So there are laws against housing drift. There is requirements that a person needs to be licensed if they're using restricted use pesticides. If they're a commercial applicator, all the commercial applicators have to be licensed. So that's one of the things that we do as well, is offer the testing and license these people. We also provide some opportunities to learn or to work to get continuing education units, to renew their licenses every 3 years, so forth. Every pesticide that's registered with EPA also has to be registered on the state level, so that's another thing that we do. So we review the labels to keep an eye open for anything that might be something that we want to keep an eye on in the state. We also encourage, we train, like I said, we have CEU opportunities. We'll speak at various events. We help to put into place the pollinator protection program a bit ago. But in essence, it's a law enforcement program. It's a lot like a code enforcement officer or a parking officer, something like that. But that's what we do. We basically see if the person is doing their pesticide application according to the rules. So with that in mind, what is it that we don't do, or what's not our purview? And I'm talking about this because there seems to be some sort of confusion at times as to what exactly our job is. And so like I said, we enforce the law, but when you enforce the law, you need a suspect. I think I have that at the bottom. Yeah, it's a law enforcement program. It requires a suspect. So if we don't know or have an idea of who may have made the application, we're not going to go and investigate, because that's not our purview. That's not what EPA gives us money to do. So with that in mind, we're not going to go out and collect a sample of anything, because honestly, although we do get some complaints about suspected bee kills, we also get a lot of complaints in the spring and summer and fall of a lot of suspected plant damage, whether it's dead trees, dead landscaping, lawns, so forth. If we don't know that there was some sort of application of a pesticide made, we're basically just searching in the dark for something. And that is the reason why we do have to have a suspect. Otherwise, we have no idea what killed it. We have no idea who may have made the application. There's nobody to enforce the rule with. Our program is not a research program. Like the presenters here today, they were research folks, basically. And they presented some really interesting information, very useful information. Shows what a complex issue this really is. Ours is not a data collection program. It's not a at-risk species protection program. That's just not what we are asked to do in our purview, in our laws. I jumped ahead of one. How did I do that? But there has been an exception. Generally, one of the reasons we don't do that when there's no suspect is because the testing is expensive. You're looking at several $100s per test, especially with bees. We ship it off to the North Carolina, the USDA lab in North Carolina. They're probably one of the best equipped labs to work with bees because that's all they do, day in, day out. They process bee samples that come in from across the country. They look for over 300 pesticides in their breakdown products, so it's a pretty comprehensive panel. So it's not cheap. But there was an exception, so let me tell you a little bit of the story. So I've been with the program for about a decade. There were 2 program managers before me. The first one was Clark Burgess, and when he got a bee complaint without a suspect, he said, "Sorry, I can't help you, that's not our purview." But we were getting more and more complaints, especially from certain areas of the state where, hey, we've got issues. We need somebody to look at this. But he stuck to his guns, if you will, and wouldn't do any further investigation unless there was a suspect. Then he moved on and another program manager came in, Scott Oldham, and he was getting the same complaint calls. And he decided, and I thought that this was a great idea, because of the number of calls coming in and the similarity of the symptoms and of what was going on, he decided, you know what, we could probably take a little bit of our budget, run a few tests, and maybe we can get an idea of what was going on, what happened. So we collected various samples, 7 from northern Utah, 3 from southern Utah, all complaints. One of the owners that had a high number of hives thought that the nearby growers were killing his hives, or that maybe it was just other people that he knew seeking some sort of revenge. But at every site that we were shown, no matter what, we took samples. And we sent them all to that USDA lab. And the results were quite interesting. Before I show you what the results are, there was that one slide previously of all these various pesticides and other chemicals found in some of the lab results. And that's a pretty extensive list. But one of the things that I remember always being taught with pesticides is that the difference between a medicine and a poison is dose. And so it's similar with all the other pesticides and chemicals that are in the atmosphere, that are in the environment. DDT has like 100-year residual on it. You'll find DDT in your body right now if they were to do a sample, because it stores in fat tissues. So a lot of these things are in the environment, and just because they're there doesn't necessarily mean that it's the cause of death. May or may not be, but the point that I'm making is that some things did show up on the test, but they were parts per billion that none of the researchers, none of the lab people thought was of any consequence. There were 4 chemicals that showed up that were of consequence. Oh, there they are. And I'll let you read those, and let's just see what the commonality is. Sorry?
Things that beekeepers use.
Yeah. I just keep skipping and do that. I'm better not push anything. Anytime I touch this thing, it's a switch. Yeah, so we found the first product, that's the methylphenylformamide. We found that to be in the highest concentration. The only way that you can find it in the United States is in a product called Amitraz, and it's basically a livestock dip. It comes in big bags, and you mix it with water and you run your livestock through it. Take care of mites and some other pests that might be living on them. Next 3 things, too, we found were all miticides. All 4 were miticides. Eventually, what we found was that there's various recipes online to make your own homemade miticide strips, treat varroa mites. These strips are pretty expensive, from what I understand. And so a lot of people found these recipes online, purchased a big bag of Amitraz, they'd buy the other products, and they'd make their own strips. But as I did more research on it, even with the thymol, which you'd think would be like the most benign out of all those, even with thymol, the university studies showed that even with the proper use of thymol, there was some bee loss. But as you increase the use of thymol, yeah, you take care of more of the varroa mites, but there was also an increase in the number of deaths of bees in the hive. And So basically, the bottom line is the things that we found of any consequence in all but one sample were things that the beekeepers themselves were applying. There was one outlier, and that was from one of the samples that we collected down south. Actually, it was near the St. George area. That was a complaint call that we got because a company had sprayed somebody's alfalfa using Mustang Max, and that did kill a lot of bees. That was the outlier. That one was definitely caused by insecticides. An acute event. So what do you do if you have a bee kill? So there's kind of a couple of ways to go with it. If you have a suspect, so you saw somebody spray, somebody told you, oh, well, I just saw somebody come by and spray, whether it's a landscaping company, whether it's, mosquito abatement, whoever it might be. If you have a suspect, call us. The phone number is there at the bottom. You can call and start a formal complaint. Okay, we will get some information, we'll come out to the site, we'll collect the sample, we'll speak to the suspects, we'll gather data, we'll do a full investigation. But there's a couple of things that you got to make sure that you follow through on to help with the investigation. One is call us ASAP, don't wait. And two, don't move the hives and don't collect the samples for us. Basically, when we do an investigation, we have to do it so that it can stand up in court. When a lawyer tries to tear it apart, it has to be able to stand up in court. So that means if you move the hive, you just tampered with the evidence, case done. You collect the samples for me, well, I can't really submit those samples because the investigator is the one who's supposed to collect them to make sure that they're properly collected, not cross-contaminated with something else, and that they're properly stored, and that there's a chain of custody that has to be followed, meaning we have to document who has handled that sample from the moment that it's collected to the moment that the lab receives it for processing. No suspect, we're not going to be able to really do much for you. Now that's not that we're wouldn't be willing to, but that's not what our budget monies allow us to do. That's not our purview. But these are two sources for you. EPA works with NPIC, which is from Oregon State. And you can email or go on their website and give them information about a bee kill. So even though you don't know, I mean, if you don't know that anybody made an application and your bees are dead, there might be some signs where you suspect it, but you don't really know what killed them. But if you provide the data to EPA, that's still something that the researchers, the data collectors can use as they go along to maybe help figure out what some issues are going on. It can also help because if there's a lot of things happening in one area, then that can bring up a red flag where there maybe could be, they could put some extra resources to it. Any questions on that?
Have you had much problems then? I mean, a few years ago, at least in our area down in Utah County, we had a lot of beekeepers complaining about mosquito abatement type thing. What do you do with, basically it's generally a government type thing, state or county or?
Most mosquito abatement districts will work with these. So if you call them and tell them, hey, I have bees, so avoid spraying this area, most of them will do that. If you're still having issues, or if you see that they're applying in such a way that they're causing the hives to be exposed, then we can look into that. We can investigate that. So, any other questions? Otherwise, I got a little bit of filler. I think we got 3 or 4 more minutes. Just talking about the mite strips for a moment. Illegal repackaging. So EPA actually got a complaint from somebody anonymously in Utah about illegal resale of mite strips. And so EPA called us and asked us to investigate it. So I went up north and met with the owner, and they gave the explanation that I expected. We're just a small mom and pop operation. A lot of the beekeepers only have 1 or 2 hives, but the strips come in large quantities, and all they want is 2 or 3 strips. So we just pull 2 or 3 strips out of the container, and we sell it to them. We make a couple of bucks off of it, and they save a lot of money because they don't have to buy the big packages. I had to write up the reports. I had to do basically the investigations on a federal level and on a state level. Submitted to EPA. They ran it out of their garage. I mean, it doesn't get more mom and pop shop than that. But it's the apivar that they were using. But this also led to another small mom and pop shop. They actually have a storefront, but they usually have 1 person working there. And they were doing the same thing. They took the apivar out and they put it into a plexiglass container with a copy of the label on top. So I had to do the same thing with them, gather the data, submit reports. So what EPA was really cueing in on is, on the label it says, may be fatal if absorbed through the skin, harmful if swallowed or inhaled, do not get in eyes or skin, on clothing, avoid inhalation of product vapor when opening the sealed packet. Basically, this can be some pretty nasty stuff if you don't handle it properly. And that was one of the reasons why EPA kind of jumped on it and asked us to jump on it. So on a state level, we gave them a written warning. We told them, you can't do that. It's illegal. You cannot take a big package of any pesticide and break it down into a smaller quantity and resell it. Under federal law, that's considered illegal repackaging. EPA wanted to send them both a fine. And EPA fines usually start out at $5,000. But we went back and forth a little bit. I kind of reminded them, hey, look at these pictures again. I mean, small mom and pop operations, they're not making any real money off of it. It's just a little bit on the side. They haven't done it since. They're not reselling it anymore. They understand and know the law now. They're following it. So in the end, they went down to a warning letter as well. But it's pretty serious stuff. You can't make your own mite strips because that's the illegal making of, or illegal production of a pesticide. And you can't break them out of a larger package and resell them. So just kind of an FYI. And that's all I got.